The air at the sky-high pavilion was thin, filtered, and carried the heavy, expensive scent of five-figure floral arrangements. I stood near the dessert table, quietly adjusting a loose silk ribbon on my sister Sofia's engagement favors. I wasn't there to be the center of attention. I was there to be a shadow, a silent support beam for Sofia's big moment. But Lydia Sterling didn't see a sister or a guest. She saw a target. She approached me with a stride that cost more than most people's annual tuition. Her eyes scanned my simple, unbranded navy wrap dress with a clinical kind of pity. Before I could even offer a polite greeting, she pressed a stack of damp, used appetizer napkins into my palm. "The service staff is lagging, dear," she whispered, her voice a polished, serrated blade. "Since you're already dressed like the help, do make yourself useful. We can't have the Sterling name associated with a messy table." I looked down at the napkins, then back at her. Lydia didn't just want me to clean. She wanted to establish a hierarchy where I was at the absolute bottom. She turned to a circle of onlookers, calling me a charming little freelancer, and laughing about how my tiny home office hobby must make me feel so out of place in a room full of industry titans. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just felt that familiar cold clarity, the same razor-sharp focus that happens right before a massive market collapse. Lydia thought she was the predator. She didn't realize she was standing in my cage. The humiliation wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, calculated leak. Arthur Sterling, Sofia's future father-in-law and a man whose ego occupied more space than his actual intellect, sauntered over to where I stood with the napkins. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my hands as if checking for dirt. "You know, Elena," he began, his voice booming with the unearned confidence of a senior VP at Sterling West Logistics. "Sofia is a lovely girl, but she comes from such modest stock. We're willing to overlook your little freelance lifestyle for the sake of the union. But let's be clear about the optics." He leaned in, the scent of expensive bourbon and arrogance radiating off him. "In the world of real industry, people like you are just noise. You're the static on the line while we move the world's freight." He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that made my skin crawl. Julian, the groom-to-be, joined them, placing a possessive hand on Sofia's shoulder as she approached us, her eyes wide with mounting dread. "Dad's right, Elena," Julian added, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We've decided the head table is for those who actually contribute to the GDP. We'll find a nice spot for you near the service entrance. It'll feel more like home, won't it?" I watched Sofia's spirit dim, her posture wilting under their collective weight. That was the moment the viper struck. It wasn't a physical blow, but a mental flip of a switch. I didn't feel hurt. I felt a clinical, razor-sharp clarity that turned their insults into data points on a failing ledger. Arthur Sterling thought he was the king of the mountain. He didn't realize the mountain was mine, and I was about to trigger an avalanche that I didn't stay for the appetizers. I walked away from the gilded center of the pavilion, my black velvet flats making no sound on the polished marble. I wasn't retreating. I was repositioning. I slipped into a small mahogany-paneled library on the mezzanine level, a room that smelled of old leather and the quiet, heavy scent of real power. I pulled out my phone, not for a social media update, but to access a secure, encrypted line that bypassed the noise of the public grid. "Initiate Protocol Blackwood," I said, my voice a flat, clinical monotone that didn't leave room for questions. On the other end, my chief of staff didn't skip a beat. They knew what Blackwood meant. Total corporate isolation for Sterling West Logistics. Tier 1, effective immediately, I added, looking at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't look like a charming freelancer anymore. I looked like a predator that had just found a breach in the cage. You see, Arthur Sterling spent his life bragging about his title at Sterling West, never bothering to check the fine print of the conglomerate that saved them from bankruptcy last quarter. Aegis Global didn't just buy their debt. We bought their air. I watched the digital dashboard on my screen as the authorization revoked flags began to blink across the Sterling family's corporate profiles. In my world, anger is a luxury I don't afford myself. I prefer the math. And the Sterlings had just gone into a deficit they could never repay. The first tremor hit at the open bar. Arthur Sterling was in the middle of a loud self-congratulatory story when he slid his black corporate card across the marble counter for a round of vintage Cristal. I watched from the mezzanine as the bartender swiped it once, then twice, a look of professional confusion clouding his face. Arthur's voice dropped from a boom to a sharp defensive bark, likely blaming the machine. He didn't know that every vein of credit he thought he possessed was being cauterized in real time. A few feet away, Lydia Sterling gasped, her hand flying to her throat as she stared at her phone. The company-leased penthouse they called home had just been flagged for immediate lease termination due to a misuse of corporate funds. It wasn't just the money. It was the oxygen. I was sucking the air out of their world one digital door at a time. To the guests, they looked like a family having a minor technical glitch. To me, they looked like a house of cards finally feeling the wind. By the time Julian's phone buzzed with his administrative suspension notice, the arrogance had completely drained from his face, replaced by a pale, sickly mask of terror. They had spent the night bragging about their status, unaware that the mountain they were standing on was actually a volcano. And I had just pressed the button. I stepped back into the light of the ballroom, my movements measured and precise. I didn't need to hurry. When you own the building, the exit doors only open when you say so. I found the Sterlings huddled near the bar, their faces a pale, sickly shade of gray that no amount of expensive lighting could fix. Arthur was shouting at a manager, his voice cracking with the desperation he couldn't hide. There's been a mistake. This card has a $500,000 limit. It's not a mistake, Arthur, I said, my voice dropping into that lethal professional register. I stood there, still in my simple navy dress, but the charming freelancer they had mocked was gone. I looked him right in the eye, my face a mask of perfect, terrifying calm. The mistake was yours. You thought the Sterling name was a shield. You didn't realize it was a target. Lydia lunged toward me, her manicured finger pointing like a weapon. You! What have you done? You're just Sofia's sister, a nobody. No, Lydia, I whispered, loud enough for the surrounding circle of socialites to hear. I'm the woman who bought Aegis Global last quarter. I'm the woman who just authorized your immediate administrative suspension pending a forensic audit. And as of 60 seconds ago, I'm the woman who owns your home, your car, and your dignity. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I wasn't just firing them, I was liquidating their entire reality. The heavy oak doors of the pavilion didn't just close behind us, they felt like the final click of a vault. The frantic, high-pitched shrieks of Lydia Sterling were cut off by the thick, soundproof marble of the hallway, replaced by the quiet, cool scent of lilies and victory. We walked toward the waiting SUV, the Chicago winter air hitting us like a cold, soul-clearing baptism. Sophia took a long, shuddering breath, her eyes wet but her jaw set in a line of iron I had never seen before. She looked at the engagement ring on her finger, a 3-carat lie bought with corporate embezzlement, and slowly, deliberately, she pulled it off. She didn't cry. She just handed it to my chief of staff. Liquidate it, she said, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. Donate the proceeds to a local arts foundation. I'm done being a footnote in a con artist's ledger. I pulled her into a real hug, the kind we shared before the world tried to tell us who we were. You're not a footnote, Sophia. You're the headline. As we pulled away, I didn't check my market updates or my spreadsheets. The debts were settled. The rot had been excised. True power is quiet. It's the ability to walk away from the noise, knowing exactly